The first time Quinn Aldridge asked me to lie to her entire family, she was standing in my workshop doorway on a gray November Friday, wearing my old Queen's University hoodie, holding a paper cup of Tim Hortons like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Just the long weekend," she said. I looked up from the walnut tabletop I'd been sanding for 3 weeks. That's how true crime podcasts start. "I'm serious, Griffin." I set down the orbital sander. She only used my name without irony when she was about to ask me something that would restructure my life in ways my insurance policy didn't cover. For the record, I'm Griffin Hale, 31 years old, and I restore antique furniture for people in Toronto with very specific feelings about mid-century credenzas. My life had become predictably pleasant. Mornings in the workshop on Roncesvalles, evenings with bad hockey games on, weekends at the farmer's market on Saturdays, and exactly nowhere on Sundays. Uncomplicated, quiet, mine. That last part was the one I should have been protecting harder. Quinn and I had been close for almost 2 years. She was my former roommate, Knox's ex-fiancée, which sounds messier than it is. When Knox ended things, quietly, clinically, with the energy of someone canceling a gym membership, Quinn stayed in our social orbit because she was brilliant and dry and had a landscape architect's eye for noticing which structures were about to collapse. After Knox left, she and I kept showing up for each other in the small ways that don't look like anything from the outside. I fixed the loose leg on her kitchen table. She picked up my prescriptions once. When I had a bad flu, we texted about terrible reality TV at 11 on Tuesday nights. I didn't examine it too closely. That felt like wisdom at the time. "My cousin Gemma's engagement party is this weekend," Quinn said, "up at the family cottage. Parry Sound." "I know. You threatened to get food poisoning." I tried. My mother offered to drive up from Barrie with soup. Amateur move. Food poisoning doesn't pair with soup. She gave me the look, the one that meant she knew I was deflecting and was letting me do it anyway. Knox confirmed he's coming. With Sasha. I put the sandpaper down properly. "My mom thinks I've been seeing someone," Quinn said carefully. "I may have mentioned spending a lot of time with someone. Someone whose hands smell like linseed oil and sawdust." I looked at my hands. She asked if it was serious. Quinn cleared her throat. I may have said something that implied a level of seriousness. "How serious?" She winced. She used the word settled. "Quinn." I panicked. Knox was announcing his relationship in the family group chat, and she was texting me every 40 minutes asking if I was okay, and I told her I was more than okay, that I was good, that I was with someone who actually saw me. The workshop went quiet except for the hiss of the space heater in the corner. "That last part," I said. "Did she infer that, or did you say it?" "I said it." I ran a hand over my face. "And she extrapolated settled from someone who sees me." Lorraine Aldridge can extrapolate a wedding from a handshake. It's a gift and a curse. She looked at me with that expression she had. Not quite embarrassed, not quite brave, something in the narrow space between them. "You know my family. You won't be blindsided when my Uncle Gerald starts explaining the Leafs roster like we don't all live in Ontario. You know Gemma's allergic to peanuts, and you know not to let my Aunt Barb talk to you near the wine because she will tell you what she thinks of your life choices. Those are all excellent reasons to stay in Toronto." "I know." She put the coffee cup down on my work table, "but the real reason is you." I waited. "Knox always made me feel like a lot," she said quietly, "like I was too much to manage, too opinionated, too in my own head, and you have never, not once, made me feel like I needed to take up less space." There it was, the thing I hadn't let myself look at directly for the better part of a year. A reasonable man would have said, "Quinn, I care about you." But asking me to spend a long weekend, pretending to be your boyfriend in a cottage full of your family, and your ex-fiancée sounds like the kind of emotional liability that doesn't get covered under a basic plan. Instead, I noticed she was still wearing my hoodie from the last time she'd been here, when she'd fallen asleep on my couch during a documentary about competitive dog grooming. I noticed she'd tucked her hands into the front pocket. I noticed that she looked tired in the way people look when they've been performing fine for too long. "What does this involve?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, relief she was trying to hide. "We drive up Friday after work." Dinner Friday night, party Saturday, brunch Sunday, home by Sunday afternoon. And your mother thinks we're together. Yes. How do we explain how we got together? She knows about Knox. Quinn's eyes slid sideways. I may have mentioned that you and I got close after the breakup. That you were the person who showed up. That part is true. I know. Something flickered across her face. That's why it was easy to say. I didn't have an immediate response to that. She knew it. She picked up a scrap of sandpaper and turned it over in her fingers like she was reading it. I'm not asking you to perform, she said. I'm just asking you to show up. You're good at showing up. The problem, which I understood with complete clarity in that moment, was that I'd been wanting to show up for Quinn Aldridge in a much more permanent way for longer than I'd admitted to myself. Pretending to be the boyfriend of someone you actually want to be with isn't a favor. It's a controlled burn in a forest you can't afford to lose. Fine, I said. She looked up. Really? I'll drive. You navigate. And when Gerald starts in on Matthews versus McDavid, I reserve the right to have a strong opinion. Her smile appeared slowly, like she didn't quite trust it. You're a Habs fan. I contain multitudes. She laughed. That specific laugh she had, the one that snuck out before she could catch it, and I felt it somewhere I wasn't supposed to. We left Friday after 5, my truck packed with her weekend bag and an unnecessary amount of firewood she insisted on bringing in case the cottage pile was low. The drive up the 400 took 2.5 hours in the tail end of November traffic, and she spent most of it giving me a family briefing, the way a diplomat might prepare someone for a tense summit. Aunt Barb thinks Gemma is marrying too young. Don't agree with her, but don't argue with her. Got it. Uncle Gerald will quiz you about what you do. Furniture restoration sounds too artsy. Say woodworking. He respects woodworking. I do woodworking. He doesn't know that yet, so it'll land well. She checked her phone. My cousin Remy will ask if we want to play Catan later. Always say yes. Never let him win. Why? He needs to learn that life doesn't concede to him just because he wants it to. I glanced at her. You've thought about this. I've had many Thanksgivings and one engagement party where Knox was the new hero of the family, and I had to pretend I was thrilled for 12 hours. She looked out the window at the dark pines. I've thought about a lot of things. The cottage appeared through the trees at the end of a gravel lane. Old stone foundation, green shutters, a dock you could see from the driveway, lit up now with string lights that someone had put up early for the party. It was beautiful in the way old Ontario cottages were beautiful. Like it had absorbed 100 weekends and was quietly proud of it. Lorraine Aldridge met us at the door before we'd finished parking. She was small, precise, and moved through the world with the energy of someone who had already figured out what she thought about you and was now politely confirming it. She hugged Quinn for a long time and then turned to me with bright eyes. Griffin, she said, like she'd been expecting me for years. Quinn talks about your work. I'd love to see it sometime. I'd like that, I said. She looked at our hands, which were, I noticed only then, still loosely connected from when Quinn had grabbed my arm in the dark of the parking area. Quinn felt me notice. She didn't let go. I'm just so glad, Lorraine said, pressing both palms to her chest. I'm genuinely glad. Quinn squeezed my hand once, apology, gratitude, warning, all three, and I squeezed back. Lorraine had given us the back bedroom. It was small and lake-facing, and decorated with the specific cottage aesthetic of quilts from different decades, and exactly one piece of abstract art that no one could explain. There was a narrow dresser, a hook on the door, a reading lamp, and one bed. One full-size bed. Not a king, not a queen, the kind of bed that had a very confident opinion about how much space two people needed. Quinn stared at it. I set our bags down. She did this, Quinn said, completely calm. Could be a coincidence. There's a pullout in the den. Maybe it was already taken. Griffin. She turned to look at me. The cottage has 4 bedrooms. Gemma and Remy each have one. Barb has one. My parents have the master. This is the spare. She looked back at the bed. She gave us the spare. Singular. She's a romantic. She's a project manager. This is strategy. I looked at the bed again. It was made up nicely. Fresh sheets, 2 pillows, a folded throw at the foot. There was a small mason jar of dried lavender on the windowsill. The kind of detail that required forethought. "I'll take the floor," I said. "You're not taking the floor. You drove 2.5 hours. I've slept on worse." "Griffin." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. "I'm not going to make you sleep on a braided rug because my mother is playing matchmaker with sleeping arrangements. Then we share." She looked at me for a moment. The reading lamp made everything warmer than it was. "This isn't weird for you? Is it weird for you?" A pause. "I'll let you know in the morning." We changed for dinner without making it awkward, which I considered a minor personal triumph. When Quinn came out of the tiny bathroom in a dark green sweater and her hair down, I was looking very deliberately at the lake through the window. "Ready," she said. "Yeah." She caught my eye for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then, "You clean up well for a man who spends his days covered in wood stain." "I contain layers," I said, "like a good finish." She made a sound that was almost a laugh and pushed me toward the door. Dinner was 9 people around a table built for 8, with Gerald at the end explaining whether a property tax reassessment could be considered exciting, and Barb refilling her own wine with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it for decades. Knox arrived 20 minutes late with Sasha, who was tall and polished, and immediately started rearranging her things on the kitchen counter with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already decided she belonged anywhere she stood. Knox saw me first. Something moved through his face that I cataloged without showing I'd noticed. "Griffin," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." "Long story," I said. Quinn's hand found my arm just below the elbow, not grabbing, just there. "Actually," she said pleasantly, "not that long." Knox glanced down at her hand. Then he smiled with all his teeth, the way he did when he was recalibrating. "You two, when did that happen?" "Gradually," Quinn said, "then all at once." She said it simply, like it wasn't anything. It settled in my chest and stayed there. At dinner, I ended up between Lorraine and Remy, which meant I spent 40 minutes discussing whether white spruce was superior to red pine for dock repair and whether the provincial budget was, as Lorraine put it, a disaster or a catastrophe. Quinn sat across from me, and every time Gerald said something about the playoff odds, her knee pressed lightly against mine under the table. "So how'd he propose?" Barb asked, leaning forward from 3 seats down. "Quinn, how'd he do it?" The table quieted. Knox was at the other end. I felt him paying attention without looking. Quinn looked at me. I looked back. The moment held for exactly long enough that I understood what she needed, and then I said, "I found an old hope chest at an estate sale. Cedar, original iron hardware. It had been in rough shape, so I spent a few weeks restoring it. The joints, the latches, everything. And I put something inside before I gave it back." The table was very still. Quinn's face had gone carefully neutral, in the way it went neutral when something had surprised her, and she was working not to show it. "A ring?" Barb asked. "A note first," I said, because I wanted to say it before I asked it. "What did the note say?" Lorraine asked quietly. I looked at Quinn. The lakeside windows were dark behind her now, just her face in the warm light, and I said the true thing, dressed in just enough fiction to pass. That she makes every room more specific, more real. That I'd spent a long time noticing her, the way she thinks, the way she pushes back when something isn't right, the way she sees things other people walk past. And that if she'd let me, I wanted to be someone she could count on in the kind of way that doesn't come with an expiry date. No one spoke for a moment. Quinn's hand was flat on the table. She reached across very slowly and put it over mine. "He also teared up a little," she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. I did not. One dignified tear. A small amount of moisture. It was November. The workshop is drafty. Lorraine pressed her napkin to her mouth. Barb made a noise suspiciously close to a sniffle. Remy said sick under his breath in the way 4-year-olds expressed genuine admiration. Knox picked up his wine glass and looked at the window. Quinn didn't take her hand back. Not through dessert, not through the tea, Not even when Barb pivoted to explaining what she thought about the municipal composting rollout. Later, on the dock, the party had thinned to a few of us and the string lights reflected flat on the black water. Quinn was beside me at the railing, shoulders almost touching. The air smelled like wood smoke and cold lake. "You improvised," she said. "I did. That was risky." "I know." She looked at me sideways. "How much of it?" She stopped. I could have made it easier, given her a percentage, a joke, an exit. "More than I planned," I said. The water moved quietly below us. She didn't fill the silence, and neither did I, because silence with Quinn had never been something I needed to patch over. "Knox used to say I overcomplicated things," she said finally. "What kind of things?" "Feelings. The way I needed to understand something before I could trust it. He said I made everything harder than it needed to be." "That's not overcomplicating. That's precision." She turned slightly. "You say that like it's obvious." "It is obvious." She looked back at the lake. Her fingers on the railing were very close to mine. "What happens Monday?" she said. The question sat between us like the last card in a hand. I turned to face her properly. "Monday, we stop lying to everyone else," I said. "But I don't want to lie to myself anymore either." She went very still. "I should have said something before this weekend," I said. "I told myself being your friend was the right kind of wanting, that it was enough. But it isn't." I watched her face in the string light dark. "I want the real version. Coffee in the morning that isn't a convenience. Taking you to the market on Saturdays, because that's just a thing we do. Waking up next to you, because we chose it, not because your mother has aggressive booking instincts." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite. "You're saying all the real things in the middle of the fake weekend." "I work with my hands. I'm bad at subtext." The corner of her mouth moved. Then she reached up and adjusted the collar of my jacket, which didn't need adjusting. Her fingers stayed near my shoulder for a second, longer than the task required. "I wanted to do something like that in the workshop," she said softly. "When you said yes." My heart made an announcement I'd been managing to ignore for a long time. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because I was afraid you'd go quiet," she said, "and I'd have to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not as good at that as I look." I took her hand from my collar and held on to it. "I'm not going quiet," I said. She looked at our hands, then at my face, checking the structural integrity of something before she decided to trust it. That was Quinn. That was always Quinn. Then Knox's voice came from behind us on the dock. "Quinn, can we talk? Just a minute." Her shoulders changed. Not collapse, just recalibration. I let go of her hand. She reached down and took it back immediately. "We're in the middle of something," she said, not turning around. "It's 2 minutes." She turned then, but didn't step away from me. "Knox." He stopped a few feet back, the dark water behind him, looking approximately as confident as a man could look while being gently refused. "I just think it seems fast, after everything." "You ended our engagement," she said. "That was 2 years ago. This is not fast." "I'm not trying to." "I know what you're doing." Her voice was level, not cold. Level, the kind of calm that costs something to maintain. "You want to know if I'm okay, or you want to know if I'm available. Either way, the answer doesn't change. I'm not uncertain." She held his gaze. "You don't need to worry about me." He glanced at me, assessing. I stayed where I was. Didn't move toward him, didn't say anything, just stood close enough that she could feel I was there if she wanted it. Knox said something low that I didn't fully catch. She listened, then shook her head once. "I don't miss what we were," she said quietly. "I miss who I thought we'd become. That's not the same thing." She looked at him steadily. No anger in it, just a door closing cleanly. "I hope you and Sasha are genuinely happy. I mean that." He had nothing to come back with. That polished surface had a hairline crack in it, just visible. "You seem different," he said. "I am different." A small pause. "Turns out some people are worth figuring yourself out for." He stood another few seconds, then walked back up toward the cottage lights. I exhaled slowly. "Okay?" I asked. "Mostly." Her hand was still in mine, and I could feel her pulse beating faster than her voice had let on. I thought I'd feel more triumphant. "What do you feel?" She considered this with genuine seriousness. Hungry. Is there any of that aged cheddar left from the charcuterie board? I laughed, surprised and real, and she leaned against my shoulder for one brief moment before we went inside. We told Lorraine the truth the next morning, before the rest of the family came down for brunch. Quinn asked her mother for a few minutes alone. Lorraine made tea first, the kind of person who needed her hands occupied when she was listening, and sat at the kitchen table in the early gray light with the lake behind her and let Quinn talk. Quinn told her about Knox announcing things in the family group chat. About the panic, about my name being the one she'd said without thinking, because I was already the person she reached for without thinking. She told her the fake part clearly and didn't dress it up. Lorraine listened without expression, both hands around her mug. When Quinn finished, the kitchen was quiet long enough that I noticed the sound of the water through the window. You thought you had to manufacture something, Lorraine said. So I'd stop worrying. Yes. Lorraine looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she set down her mug and said, "Oh, Quinn." They met each other in the middle of the kitchen. I moved toward the counter to give them the space, but Quinn's hand reached back blindly, and I put mine in it. Lorraine noticed. She looked at me over Quinn's shoulder, and something in her expression settled. Not the satisfaction of having been right, but something quieter and more genuine than that. So the arrangement was invented, she said carefully. Yes, Quinn said. And this? Quinn looked at me. I said nothing, waited. This is new, Quinn said. And real, and yes, a bit terrifying. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, and then she picked up her mug again. Most things worth having are. She pointed two fingers at me lightly. Griffin, are you going to be good to her? Yes. No caveats. None. She studied me the way she might study a renovation quote, looking for what wasn't being said. Then she seemed to find the thing she was looking for. I cannot return the linen napkins I bought after Quinn's last visit, when I may have jumped to certain conclusions about timelines. She looked meaningfully at the ceiling. I'm down $48 and some assumptions. Mum. I'm noting it. She stood and reached for the waffle iron. Come sit down. I made too much batter, and it's not going to make itself. The party honored Quinn. Some of the family needed a moment to recalibrate, and Barb was visibly scandalized for approximately 8 minutes before pivoting to asking whether we'd considered Collingwood for a future event she was already half planning in her head. Remy fist bumped me without explanation. Gemma hugged Quinn and said finally, as though she'd been expecting a different outcome all along and was relieved it had finally arrived. Knox and Sasha left early Sunday morning. He paused at the door, looked at Quinn once, something unreadable crossing his face, the look of a man trying to determine whether he'd made an error or simply a choice, and then raised a hand in a small wave. Quinn raised hers. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, maybe not in a straight line. But it was lighter than it had been, and sometimes that's the only direction that matters. On the drive back down the 400 that afternoon, the November light was flat and silver and entirely Ontario. Quinn fell asleep somewhere around Barry, with her head tilted toward the window and her hand resting on the console between us, palm up, like an open question. I drove with one hand and rested the other over hers. She didn't wake up, but her fingers curled around mine. When she did wake, somewhere in the city traffic as we crossed back into Toronto, she blinked at our joined hands and said nothing for a moment. Hi, she said. Hi. She didn't move her hand. Did I drool on your seat? A small amount. Do not tell anyone. I am extremely discreet. She smiled, still slow with sleep, and looked out the window at the city, reassembling itself around us. Griffin. Yeah. Last night on the dock, you weren't performing. It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. No, I said. She turned her head toward me. Good, she said quietly. I wasn't either. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. 6 months later, the hope chest was real. I found it at an estate sale in Hamilton. Early 1900s, oak, original iron hardware still intact. It took me 3 weeks of evenings to restore it properly. Re-gluing the joints, replacing two broken slats, polishing the hardware until it held the light the way it was supposed to. I brought it to Quinn's apartment while she was at a site visit and set it in the corner of her living room, next to the window where she kept her drafting books. Inside, under a folded square of linen, a note, and something small in a velvet box. She came home and stood in the doorway of the living room for a long time. Long enough that I was glad I'd stayed. Then she sat down on the floor in front of it, opened the lid, found the note first, and read it once and then again. When she looked up, her eyes were bright and slightly devastating. "You are genuinely dangerous," she said. "I've been told I'm very trustworthy." "By who?" "Lorraine." She made a sound that broke apart into a laugh and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Then she reached into the chest and found the velvet box. She opened it. The ring was simple, reclaimed gold, a small stone, the kind of thing that looked like it had always been hers. "Well," Quinn said. "Well," I said. She looked at the ring, then at me, in that specific way she had, checking the structural integrity of something before she decided to trust it entirely. "Ask me," she said. So I did. The following spring, Lorraine sent us a photo of the waffles she made for the family the morning after we called her with the news. There was a post-it note stuck across the front in her handwriting, $48. Worth it. Quinn taped it to our fridge, where it stayed for a year. Every time I reached past it for something, I felt like the luckiest man in a province full of people who had no idea how lucky I was. That felt right. Some things don't need an audience to be real.